Hi, I'm Rhonda Henry. I'm a work-life therapist at UK's Office of Work-Life. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about managing back-to-school expectations and some of the anxiety and worry that comes along with those these days. So let's start. One moment to move my little box over there. Just some basic things for us to think about as we kind of go into this. These are some of the understatements of the day that you'll be getting from me. First of all, that realization things are going to look different this year. Things are already looking different. You know, many of the things I'm talking about today I'm going to use examples around the school year, but for folks who have kids that are younger, that may be in a preschool or daycare kind of setting, a lot of these same things are going to hold true, even if some of the examples I'm using are more about kids that might be in a little bit older schooling. Keeping in mind that we might need to redefine success this year. You know, what progress looks like, what success looks like. And that's not just for our kids, but it's for us too. You know, what does successful parenting look like during this? Because I think, you know, one of the things that I see in meeting with clients, I meet with a whole lot of individual folks, and this is such a huge topic we talk about, is that pressure that we put on ourselves to do this right, to figure out the best way to do it, can definitely add more stress to our plate, and sometimes can kind of get in the way of us figuring out a plan of how to deal with it. Knowing that things are going to change, they're probably going to change again, and they might change again. And so flexibility and being able to give ourselves some grace around that is going to be really important. And then another piece we're going to talk about is the fact that one of the best ways that we can support our kids is when we take care of our own needs. You know, that old adage about, you know, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help somebody else. We can't be there for our kids maybe in the way we want to be if our own needs are getting completely neglected or put on the back burner all the time. So being able to pull self-care into this is going to be an important part as well. Okay. So just kind of a touch and base, what our kids are experiencing right now. I'm not going to read through every word of every slide, of course, but I'm just going to touch on some things from each one of these. You know, I think for many of us, we kind of remember that March 13th date. That's the one that sticks in my mind. That was my last like normal day on campus before everything felt like it got turned upside down.
Am I eating my lunch yet? Is it lunch yet?
Oh, I'm going to, let's see, just a reminder, everybody stay on mute if we can. Keeping in mind that for our kids, a lot of them were kind of pulled out of their life at that point, what their norms were, their friends, their teachers, their classrooms, their daycares, and everything kind of switched. For most of our kids, it's the biggest life change that they went through in terms of their day-to-day. For many of us as adults, it's that way as well. But our ability to try to understand this or comprehend it, to try to make sense of it, may be a little different than our kids. And so just kind of giving some weight to that this is a huge change. They're also seeing the adults in their life worry and figure out new things and express their own sort of fears around this. And I think what felt normal feels really upside down for a whole lot of kids. Now, kids are certainly resilient, and we're going to be talking about how to kind of capture some of that resilience. But I think we have to start with, you know, recognizing what they're going through. So looking at some ways that this kind of impacts our kids' behavior and health. Again, we see lots of different things that are on the screen there. For younger kids, you may see things that are a little more clingy or regressive. You know, you may see older behaviors kind of come back up, or them needing comfort in different ways. For older kids, you may see more isolation, more irritability that comes up, because we've got a lot of lack of control. You know, for kids that are used to having a little more independence or being able to see friends or do sleepovers, they're maybe not getting to do that in the same way. So you may see this depending on your kid's personality or circumstances. You may see a lot of these. That desire to stay home. I know some parents have been surprised by that, where some kids that don't really want to go out to a store, or they start getting kind of fearful if they see people without a mask on. And so paying attention to how this shows up for your particular child, because obviously you're not going to necessarily see all of these, but you may see these show up in different ways. I think one of the sort of overarching changes I would keep in mind is if you see a big change of behavior, you know, if something is really out of the ordinary for your kid, what's going on there? Kind of what can we trace that back to, and what's happening? So what do kids need at that point? It sounds really basic, but it feels really big. So they need to feel safe. They need that feeling of belonging. You know, for a lot of them, that came from their classroom, from a team sport they played on, that sort of thing. To have a feeling of control. And that last one, I don't know about you, I sometimes struggle to find what I can control in the craziness of this world right now. But even if it's small things, and we're going to talk through some examples, you know, even if it's choosing which homework to work on first, or giving a choice of different activities they can have during a break time, choices around meals, something where they get some feeling of control. Because as hard as it is to find it, we've all got control of things to some degree in some situations. And again, we'll talk about some of those examples. So let's hone in a little bit on sort of school anxiety in particular. So these are some of the things that you may see from kids with specific school anxiety. You'll see a lot of overlap with that other list that we had a couple slides back. And I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that pandemic anxiety or worry and school anxiety or worry may have a lot of overlap, but they may not be exactly the same. You know, for some kids, going back to school, for a lot of kids, it's an exciting thing. They want to see their friends, or they're happy to get to the end of summer. For kids that are doing virtual learning, this again might show up differently. If there's a time where their learning switches to in-person, you may see some of these things spike as well at that point. Think about our own struggles in dealing with this. You know, probably one of the things I hear most from folks is how tired they are, like just so much fatigue. And, you know, I used to be able to do this and this and this, and my productivity was so much better. Our kids are dealing with those same things. Again, it might look slightly different than how it does for an adult, but knowing that even with adult resources, if we're struggling with that, our kids are going to be feeling that too, and they're not going to necessarily know how to handle that. For some kids, it may show up in some of those physical symptoms, you know, upset stomach, headaches, sleep disturbance, irritability, lack of concentration. So I think anytime we're seeing behaviors that are problematic, it's that good time to sort of step back and question what's going on, you know, what's changing, what's happening here. Sometimes our kids are going to be able to identify it pretty directly and sort of clearly, or you're going to know that's what it is. It's the night before, we're going back to school in person, therefore I'm seeing some of these things. Other times it's just a lot more complicated, you know, and so we'll see that change in behavior, and we almost have to backtrack and look at where did this come from and what's going on. So a number of things that I pulled are from, in this next few slides, are from this website, and I wanted to share this one with you all. This is actually a children's hospital in Texas, and it's this children's.com is their website. I came across this a few weeks ago. I just thought they had a lot of really good resources, so I wanted to share this one with you, not just around COVID, but just a lot of good sort of health and wellness resources for kids. And I just thought they had some really good materials. So I wanted to be sure you saw this, and we're going to talk through these 8 sort of tips in a little bit more detail. And this is also at the end of the program. I'll also have this on the final slide, and we'll be sharing the program for anyone who's interested in a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So let's talk about these sort of 8 components around managing children's anxiety. I think that first piece of creating routine. So, you know, we all do better when we've got some routine and some predictability, especially when we're in this time with so much change and so much just lack of predictability, honestly. And so involving your child where you can, you know, talking through, you know, what's this look like? And, you know, there may be some things they don't have a lot of ability to have control over. So, you know, if you're in a school setting online with synchronous classes and they're logging in at certain times and taking breaks at certain times, okay, you'll deal with that. But when it comes to other things, maybe what they do right after they're done with school, or what they do in the morning before they get started, how you all spend your lunchtime, talking to them about some of those things so they do have that chance again for a little bit of control, because even a little bit of input can really go a long way in helping them feel a little more grounded. You know, looking at routines always is going to be a better routines or stronger routines are always going to help more with things like sleep habits, healthy eating, physical activity. Those other things that we know are important is just a good foundation for our kids. I strongly suggest using a visual of some kind with this. So whether it's a sort of to-do list, a goal chart, a schedule you have on the fridge, you know, writing out something and then let your kid decorate that or color around it. Just something so again, you're doing this together where it feels like, yeah, we're both figuring this out. This piece of checking in and listening. I think sometimes it can be scary to check in with our kids because we don't have the answers to the worries that they've got. And I get that. I get that. Just because we're checking in doesn't mean that we always have to have an answer specifically, but it gives value to the fact that expressing what the worries are is part of helping with it. That's something I see in counseling every day. You know, when I'm talking with folks, I don't have answers that, unravel a problem in someone's life all the time. But sometimes it's the process of talking about it, of putting words to it, putting it out in the air. That helps. It helps unburden us from some of those things. Sharing ways that you cope when you feel nervous or worried. This one, like, take note of this one. This is a really powerful one. And so being able to say, for my son, yeah, Ty, when I get worried about this, sometimes I can't sleep, but here's what I do. I try to, read a book right before bed, or I try to be grateful for things in my life. And it does a couple of things. It normalizes the feelings they're having. It also then models for them that we can deal with difficult things in our house. In our family, we can deal with difficult things that come our way. Normalizing the feelings, asking your child what they need. They may or may not be able to articulate that, but even asking, do you need a hug? I mean, even just those little things can be helpful. And again, gives them, again, another opportunity to have some control or some input in what's going on. Catching signs of anxiety early is definitely helpful because it sort of can snowball. It gets some energy behind it, and it can be a lot easier for it to sort of go on and really build and sort of take over. One thing I would suggest is when you notice some of the acting out sort of signs from your child that they're anxious, and that might be more of that sort of, blow-ups with a sibling, or getting really withdrawn, that sort of thing. I'm going to challenge you to think back, sort of reflect back on what were you noticing, or what were other adults in the house noticing before that? So before the big blow up happened, were you seeing other signs? Were you seeing, some stomach upset or nail biting or things that might be a little more subtle? Because the more we can sort of catch those early signs and help not only you identify those, but ultimately to help your child identify them, because that's really powerful. So yeah, being able to say, ooh, I noticed that your stomach was upset this morning. What was going on? Let's talk about that. Well, when our stomach's upset, here's some things we can do. Because that to me is a really powerful piece. I talk with folks all the time about, what did you notice? Did you pay attention to how you were feeling, or where were your thoughts? Because a lot of times what we find is we're way down that road of anxiety before we actually realize what's going on. The coping skills piece for me is huge. Like, we could do a whole presentation just around coping skills. Belly breathing, I'm going to talk about that in a separate slide in a little bit, so I'm just going to skip past that one, but it's a huge one. It gets its own slide. Identifying those space in the house where your child feels calm. That may be their room. That may also be somewhere else. That may be, on the low seat sitting beside you in the couch or something like that. So exploring with them, where do you feel calm? Where do you feel good? Being able to have tactile options available. So whether it's the squishies, and if you don't know what squishies are, we can talk about that at the chat at the end. A blanket, a stress ball, but something where they can hold on to something, they can feel it. Anything that involves our senses helps us get grounded a little more easily. Encouraging things that promote calm. So again, knowing your child is important in this. For some kids, music can be a really calming thing. For others, it might really ramp them up or make things worse. But coloring, Play-Doh, I say with tentative, I put that out there tentatively because Play-Doh for us might be stressful. Reading, watching a video, music, those kind of things. But having sort of a set of 2 or 3 things on hand, so that if that feeling is coming up, okay, let's tap into our toolbox and see what we can do to bring about some calm. When they feel less anxious, once we can get that immediate sort of worry or anxiety to settle a little bit, then they may be able to better articulate their feelings. We may be able to address something that's worrying them or setting on their minds. Focusing on what we can control. So I've kind of hit on that a few times as we've been talking, and I'll keep threading that through. For our kids, that's important. For us as adults, that's important. The more out of control things in the world feel, the more we need to find those small moments or small places where we can feel some control and autonomy in our world. Trying to avoid that what if thinking. This is an incredibly difficult one to manage these days for a lot of adults that I talk with, honestly, both in my personal and professional life, because there are so many unknowns. We face challenges, and for many of us, if I know, okay, for 60 days, I've got to buckle down and focus on this and knock this thing out or get through something that's really hard. Okay, I might not like it, but I can do it. I can sort of marshal my resources a little bit. The sort of open-ended nature of what we're living in right now, and I'm focusing a lot on pandemic. We've also got lots of political, social unrest. There's a lot of things in the world right now coming at us. So as much as we can kind of calm that what if thinking and even sort of focusing on a shorter time frame. You know, I don't know what it's going to look like in December when we're dealing with these things. I don't know what it's going to look like the day after Election Day. What can I do today? What can I do this week or while we're in online learning? How do we look at these small chunks and make a plan for that part with some trust that when I get to the next stage, then I'll make a plan for that. Recognizing when the what if thinking is coming up and then trying to sort of use that as a cue to refocus. Once we kind of know what our child's thinking about, then helping them to consider, is this what if thinking or is this based on something real that's going to come up? You know, maybe it's, when I go back to school, I'm going to have to wear a mask and that's really uncomfortable and I don't want to. And how am I going to manage that? Well, that's not so much I guess there's a component of what if thinking about what if I go back in person, but that's probably a pretty realistic thing to think about, you know, so maybe that's a thing to think, to give some discussion to practice, to come up with some ways to manage it if they're feeling anxious about that. If it's something that's in that what if category, then using that as that opportunity to refocus. Okay, I know that that's a scary thought, so you're affirming the thought or the worry that's there, but what can we do today? What can we do this week to manage some of that? The other one I want to point out, though, is the last one under that last blue box there is trying some regular gratitude practice with your child. And I always think that phrase of gratitude practice sounds so big and complicated. And it's really just doing, acknowledging things that we're grateful for in sort of a specific way on a regular basis. So maybe this is something, you know, before bedtime you do with them, or you do as they're eating their breakfast and sort of getting their day started. But when we're doing gratitude practice, one thing that I like to suggest is we usually try to come up with 3 things. And we want to explore them in a little more detail than just, my dog, my mom, and my house. Okay, we could all say those probably every day. What if I'm wanting to talk about why am I grateful for my son, for example? Well, why am I grateful for him today? Well, that might be because last night he made banana bread and he brought me a piece over, and I'm really grateful he took time out of his day to do that. So it's a really good habit for your children. It's a good habit for you as well if you don't already do that. And it also is such a good discussion point around why are you grateful for that thing or why does that matter? I think that to me, that is such a more productive path to positive thinking as opposed to that toxic positivity idea. And some of you may have heard that phrase, this idea that we just, we have to look on the bright side of everything. And yes, we can both be grateful for things that are in our lives, but we don't want to completely brush off our fears and our worries because sometimes that just makes them grow. And so being able to acknowledge both of those, to me, is a healthier way of kind of balancing that. And knowing that even when we're in times of struggle and worry, there are still things to be grateful for and being able to dig into that just a little bit. So I just think if you don't already do that with your family, it's a really good time to sort of add that component in. Staying connected with other folks, I think there's been lots of talk, just even sort of publicly or on the news around using technology, Zoom, those kind of things. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I'm just so zoomed out. The idea of setting down to one more social thing on Zoom is overwhelming, but not making that assumption that that's the same for our kids, and if they've not tried doing that, trying to encourage them to try something new. One of my favorites, I had a client a couple of months ago, time has no meaning anymore, could have been 3-4 months ago. And their little kiddo, who was like 4 or 5, was just doing coloring play dates on Zoom and showing, things up to their friend, holding their stuff up. Another one, they were going around the room and just showing toys to each other. And like they played with their friend for like 45 minutes that way. So again, just because we're tired of that doesn't mean that our kids necessarily are. Even going back to kind of old school things, writing letters or mailing cards, making cards, considering, again, what you would consider safe, but alternative play dates of some kind, is there some space for that? And then this idea of seeking support when necessary. So one of the things, that our office does is provide therapy, and we also see children. And so sometimes we're not always sure when does something get to the point that maybe we need to talk to somebody outside of just our family. And so these might be some questions to consider. Is your child unable to complete tasks in the way they normally would? Are they not wanting to participate in things they typically enjoy? I think for me, that's one of the big ones. because it's a pretty easy way to see a change in behavior. Not sleeping well, and again, is that a prolonged thing? That's different than, a night here or there, but are we starting to see that on a more consistent basis? Changes in energy, appetite, especially for our littler kids, because they can't always articulate verbally, what's going on for them. So we're really having to look at that change in behavior. Belly breathing, I'm going to let you read the benefits there, but I want to talk for a second about just the practice of that. So when we're teaching a kid belly breathing, it's called that because we want your belly to move and not just up at your chest. So a lot of us do this really shallow breathing that just stays up in our chest. This is one of the most beneficial tools you can teach your kid. And if you aren't doing it yourself, learn it together, get into a habit of doing it together, having them put their hands on their belly, like right around their belly button, and just doing those deep breaths. And sometimes it helps to have them count with it so they can count to 4 as they're breathing in, and then count to 4 as they're breathing out. See if that timing is right, but we want to slow it down just a little bit. I taught this to my son years ago, just as a way when he would cry, he would get all out of breath and all discombobulated. And we would do that to bring a feeling of control back, so because if we feel in more control of our body, then we're able to think. We're able to calm that nervous down a little bit and actually articulate our thoughts or feelings or make a plan for what to do. There's lots of good video clips out there and different ways to learn this, but it's really pretty basic. And truly just being able to start doing it on a regular basis and teaching your child how to do that for themselves, it's a really effective tool. So a few other things that you can do to help sort of in the environment that you're in, using calm voices, sharing kind words. If we're in, how do I say this? Because we are human and living with other humans, there are times that our house will not be this oasis of calm, and there will sometimes be maybe chaos and maybe disagreements, and everything will feel upside down. These are aspirational things. Trying to be calm when we can, trying to share those kind words, praising your child when they overcome a worry or they try something new. If they never wanted to do a play date on Zoom, but they gave it a try, even if it didn't go great, giving them some praise for trying something new, letting them see that you're proud of them for putting that effort out and stepping outside their comfort zone. Some things around space, I think, most of us recognize, and I know some folks may be working at home, some may be doing hybrid, some may be back on campus altogether, but we don't do well when our space feels chaotic. So having a place that's set up for your child for online learning, having, again, those visual cues to keep track of what's going on, a schedule, a calendar, a whiteboard, bringing some of those anchors in because it helps. I mean, there's a reason teachers' classrooms look the way they do. We don't have to recreate that entire thing, but can we have a corner, of the dining room that's got some of these things posted or that has some things to help sort of visually get your child sort of settled. One thing that I'd seen recently, and I cannot begin to remember who I saw this or where I saw this. I think it was in my social media, but they had a couple of kids were at a dining room table and a parent was there all trying to work, and they set up those trifold sort of foam boards, and it just kind of kept everybody from getting distracted by everybody else. So even those kind of things, notice where do we get off track, and is there something I could do to sort of make our space different? Same thing with materials. We don't want to start the day feeling chaotic, not being able to find things, having some kind of dedicated space. It can seriously be as simple as a laundry basket or a box, some space that these things go in so that that when it's time to start the day, you can pull the stuff back out when you need to. And then trying to, let kids get some of their back to school supplies. I'll totally admit, I nerd out on back to school supplies. I love some paper and pens, you all. And so being able to let them pick out some of those things. For kids that are doing online learning, maybe they get some new headbands or earrings or, something fun to hang behind their seat that they're going to be in if they're on video. Just some of those things to still bring in some special feelings about that start of the school year. So here's our transition to taking care of ourselves in this process. And I love this quote. People are overwhelmed by big emotions. It's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. And this one really speaks to me because as a pretty empathetic person, it's easy for me to get caught up in the storm of somebody else's worry and chaos. And so if this is helpful to you, write it down, stick it on your computer screen, have that front and center, have something for you that can sort of help you get grounded into what do I bring to the situation. So let's talk self-care. We're going to go through some of these, so that's some examples I want to point out. Knowing self-care is easy. It's easy to put on the back burner. It's easy to sort of not have time for it, to let it be the thing that falls off the radar when everything else is going on. But I think probably one of the biggest challenges I see people have with it is feelings of guilt. Why am I giving myself this time? Why am I taking some alone time when there's so much to be done? And trying as best we can to get grounded and stay in the fact that when we take care of our own needs, we're better able to support other folks, whether that's our kids, our own parents, our partners, whatever that might be. It also allows us to model healthy behavior. This is huge. I mean, our kids watch what we do. And when we're trying to tell them to take care of themselves and to slow down and take a breath, if we're not doing some of those same things, they're going to notice that they're going to respond to what we do, not what we say. And so it's got a lot of benefit to it in multiple ways. I think one core piece of self-care, especially right now, is accepting that uncertainty, that there's not always a right answer. There's this sort of radical acceptance, is what we talk about. And it doesn't mean we have to like everything that's going on. But sometimes it's giving ourselves some grace to know that there's not just one path for this. That as circumstances change, as we learn more, we may make different decisions. That different people who we care about and respect may make different decisions than we do. And so, I think that really, it's a place where it's really easy to feel uncertain, insecure, guilty, which just drains us of our energy. It doesn't let us do anything good for ourselves or other people. Acknowledging our own feelings even when they're uncomfortable. So this piece I mentioned earlier, this toxic positivity, being cautious of being in a place where everything's great, everything's wonderful, I'm always fine. I think there's a difference between that and looking on the positive side of things or having gratitude for things that are working. Because if we don't ever acknowledge the struggle, then as we push it down, it often comes out in other ways. It comes out in irritability. It comes out in sleeplessness, in a lot of physical symptoms, stomach upset, back pain, headaches, all sorts of other things. It doesn't mean we want to get stuck in those negative thoughts. We don't want to live there, but we have to acknowledge them. We deserve to be able to acknowledge how hard some of these things are. And then we can also do that, balance it with that gratitude practice, or balance it with looking at some of the other things that actually are working. Distinguishing in the same way between your own productive and unproductive worries. So just like with our kids, we don't want to get stuck in that what ifing. It's easy to go there. If we realize, I've read something online, or I've watched something on the news, or I've talked to a friend, and I'm really going down that path. Okay, put the brakes on, back up. How do I sort of shift my thinking to more productive things? What do I do in the next, week, the next day? In that way, be mindful of who you're talking to about your worries. And I think we all know we have different friends that bring different energy to us. And so I know who my friends are that were going to get me ramped up if I'm upset about something. They're going to have my back. They're going to get as mad about it as I am. But they may or may not be the one who's helping me to sort of make a plan or clarify my thoughts. So just being aware, of who you're talking with and some of those limitations. Maybe you're talking to a relative, or your partner, and they've got legitimate things to say, but that doesn't need to be maybe the only perspective that you've got about things. I think cultivating compassion for yourself and other people is just, I can't say enough how important that is. Being able to give ourselves some grace along the way, being able to understand we're all trying to figure this out and trying to do the best that we can. I think it's a place of practice flexible thinking. Again, understatement of the day. I think that's what we've all been bombarded with, is being flexible. And if I never hear the phrase new normal again, it'll be too soon. But trying to be aware of your own thinking in those times where often when we feel fearful or we feel like things are lacking, we go to a much more rigid way of thinking. And so the more we can stop, slow down, take that breath, get different perspective, it lets us be a little more flexible in our thinking. Is paying attention to grief. What I mean here with grief is grief around experiences that we're not necessarily going to get to have this year. We saw a lot of folks, actually, let me back up. Of course, we want to be grateful for health, if we have not lost a family member, those sort of things. But there's still a component of grief to what's going on in the world right now in terms of just lost opportunities. We saw a lot of folks with seniors last year who didn't get to do those senior experiences. Kids who might be starting school this year, you're not getting to go to the classroom the way that you had pictured being able to do that. again, we want to acknowledge the feeling of that loss. Those are real things. Doesn't mean that we stay stuck there. Doesn't mean we don't say, yeah, I'm really disappointed I didn't get to go to my classroom, but gosh, I'm grateful that we've got a teacher who's put so much effort into online learning, or they've really done a great job of keeping the kids connected. Again, we want to acknowledge the feelings so that we can process those. I think it's also a time to really focus on values and finding that sort of source of meaning, you know, and going back to that very first slide, where we might have to redefine success or redefine progress. You know, maybe we had hoped that our school year would look different for our kids. I think most of us would probably agree to that. But if we go back to what those values are, but it's important to me that my kid love learning. Well, I can still foster that even in this different environment. Or it's important to me that my kids make connection to other people. How do I do that in this environment? So coming back to those core beliefs, even if we have to do it or approach it in a different way than what we expected, can help us still feel motivated and more hopeful in what we're doing. And I think just like with our kids, this is a place of seeking support when we need it, whether that's informally among family or friends, groups like this, whether it's talking to somebody in a therapy setting, just to kind of manage your own emotions so that you are better prepared at home to do what you need to do. So the next one I want to talk about just briefly is sort of work challenges in particular. So, one of the things that can be hard is trying to navigate work responsibilities while we're parenting, as you all know. So just some ideas here for this one. I think talking to our supervisor about how school situation or daycare situation may impact work, doing that in that front end as much as we can, knowing that, okay, if this switches in this way, this might be an impact. If we go back to in-person learning, but then there's something and we have to switch back to online, here's what this might look like. Communicating often, this is the time to truly step up your communication. And I'm sure, again, we're almost 6 months into this. I'm sure a lot of you have already dealt with some of these things already, but not losing track of it. Because again, every time, something new is coming, it's another change, another adaptation, we need to be able to communicate what those needs are. I think it's a good place to seek real specific feedback, identifying goals or deadlines. So, getting that clarity. Okay, if a supervisor is asking you to work on something, okay, when does this need to be done? What are the specific things? What are the priorities? Even being able to say, I'm struggling to sort this part out. Can you help me think through what are the priorities among these 3 or 4 things that are on my plate? Articulating boundaries when we can, so even if that's maybe, I don't know, I can't work through lunch because I've got to be able to take this break and help my kid with this thing. But I could work a little bit later if I need to once my partner gets home. So boundaries are hard in this situation. I realize that because you can't just set the boundaries that you would necessarily always like. But looking for, is there a piece of this that I could add a little bit of a limit to that would make life a little bit easier? Developing those contingency plans. Again, I think lots of us are already doing that. If somebody gets sick, if something changes in this way, if I have to start going into my office, more days than I already am, what can I do for some backup or contingency help? I think anytime we're asking for any sort of flexible work schedule, bring in alternate sort of ideas to the table so you've got some ideas of what might work as well. I think because we're communicating so much and because there's so many moving parts, following up with an email after you talk with your supervisor, say you're doing a Zoom one-on-one, following up with a meeting after that. Okay, this is what I understood. I'm going to plan to adjust my schedule in this way, or I'm going to put this project on the back burner and focus on this one. Just for a couple of things. One, it's just that clear communication. It is making sure that you've understood things in the same way they have. It's also some documentation. This is what our plan was. So if something changes, you've got that as sort of a touchstone. And again, I think this is a space where that grace and flexibility, being able to give it to ourselves and to both our supervisor, our coworkers, all sorts of other folks, because we're all figuring out so many new things. So for me, this is what a lot of it comes down to. Being a parent during a pandemic is to be worried and uncomfortable. That does not mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing your job. This is important stuff. Our kids' mental wellness, physical wellness, education, all of these things are important, and trying to balance those, trying to figure out the best approach. It's going to bring worry and discomfort, and just being able, again, to set in some acceptance of that. That's that piece of giving ourselves some grace along the way. All right. So this is us. This is the 4 therapists. It's not our whole office, but these are our 4 therapists. And as we mentioned earlier, we've got free confidential services available. So keeping in mind, no documentation around our therapy services is accessible to other folks at UK. So this does not connect to personnel records or health records. It's just going to be with the therapist that you're working with. We're able to see children as well as adults. We are using a telehealth format for the foreseeable future. We're doing individual counseling. We don't do couples counseling. We can make a referral for that, but that's just not something we provide in-house. All employees are eligible for 5 sessions per year, and that renews on a fiscal year basis. We see employees, sponsored dependents, as well as retirees, and we do group presentations like this one. So if there's other groups that you think it might be useful to talk about some aspect of life right now, we always are happy to set up something with you to either do one that we've already put together or to work up something specific for your group. I've got information there about making an appointment. You can schedule appointments online, super easy. You can choose between the 4 of us. And then there's also a phone number there to talk with Dana, who's our administrative assistant, and she's happy to help you navigate that if that's a little bit easier. The last piece that I have on there is the online resource. That's where I pulled those 8 anxiety sort of coping strategies from. And so again, I think that's a really good website, not just around COVID things, but they had just lots of good kid information around health and wellness. So I just thought that might be of interest to folks. All right.